The export market is a very important aspect of the food and fiber industry, and it's important to a couple of people in particular. It's really important to producers, because usually producers in the United States produce more as an aggregate than what is consumed here in the United States. So where does all that extra go? Where does that surplus go? Well, we put that in the export market and we usually ship that out to other countries. So the producers are heavily benefited by the export markets. Another person that this is important to is those firms that actually move these commodities to foreign ports. Those that are in the process of actually selling these commodities overseas. And these other countries, these other nations actually value ours, and they see that there's an added value by these firms through the aspect that they both store, and then they go through the logistical aspect of transporting these goods to other nations. So how does this stack up in volume? Well, one of the key aspects, or one of the most important things, is that we export more than we import on an aggregate, on a total, in terms of agricultural products. So it helps offset the trade deficit that we face in the nation. It doesn't offset it completely, but it does go to help offset it, at least in part. And then a lot of the commodities that we have in the United States, we actually do export a lot of. One of the ones that we export a lot of is the world's coarse grain. You see, the United States produces 70% of the world's coarse grain and exports that. They also export and produce 65% of the world's soybeans. So whenever it comes to those grains, we are producing and exporting a massive amount. And we're also exporting commodities all across the spectrum. But I'm just highlighting two in terms of the actual percentages of how much we actually export and how much we actually produce. So what could affect domestic producers? Well, world events. World events go a long way to affecting domestic producers. Supply and demand of foreign countries can drastically affect domestic producers. So whenever we talk about the supply and demand from foreign countries, if a foreign country demands a lot of that particular commodity and we export a lot of it to it, then it can actually raise the prices for our goods here. Also, if we have a large supply of agricultural products here in the United States, or even a supply of, say, a small supply of that same commodity in other countries, and we can export to it, it can actually help our domestic producers in that way. If demand rises, or if supply of a commodity falls in foreign countries and we can export to them, then we'll actually see increased prices for our domestic producers. Also, trade negotiations. Those will affect domestic producers. Whenever we start dealing with trade negotiations and we deal with tariffs. See, a tariff is a tax on goods that are being imported or possibly exported out of a country. And as a nation, if a nation places a tariff on our goods, then those goods are basically, the price is raised in the country that is importing them, and it makes them less valuable, so our consumers buy less, and it drives down our prices here in our country. Or if these trade negotiations go a positive way for us, and we actually see that these tariffs fall, it could raise prices for producers. Another aspect that could affect domestic producers is food security in importing nations. You see, many nations want to have a strong food security program, meaning that they want to be able to produce enough to where they don't have to rely on other nations. See, think about it this way. If you were a nation that imports 90% of your food from, say, country X, and then the country that you are winds up basically making country X mad, and they cut off all of your food imports. Well, that goes a long way to kind of hurting that food security in that nation. So as these importing nations that are majorly importing nations, as they want to try and obtain more food security, they're going to start trying to produce more of their own and import less. That'll affect domestic producers. Also, the foreign exchange. How does the dollar compare to the euro? How does the dollar compare to the Chinese yen or the ruble or the Canadian dollar, for that example? How does the dollar stack up? Well, as the foreign exchange rates change, it can make our currency seem more expensive or less expensive in the eyes of other countries. If our currency becomes, say, less expensive, then they can trade less of their currency for more of ours, allowing them to buy more from us. So foreign exchange also plays a large part in what it will affect domestic producers.